Well, thank you, and thank you to the Coalition for inviting me. It's an honor to speak with you today. Um, our topic, and I apologize in advance, I thought I actually had a little longer to speak, so I was last night frantically cutting this down. So sort of like Cicero to Atticus, if I had more time, I would have written you a shorter letter. But what do I want to address today? And because it's so cut down, I'll be shameless. The full story is in the book I published in 2018, the year I was canceled, which I do have some copies here. So if you want to get the fuller story, I have some copies at the table, the other vendor area. But I want to answer the question, what is a canceled priest? Because I've gotten this question quite a lot. Some people contact me and say, hey, this coalition canceled priest thing, what is that? Like, what is a canceled priest? How do we know the difference between a canceled priest or a persecuted priest and just a bad, disobedient priest who's being punished? And the problem with that question is really a problem of our modern times, because we have centuries of bad philosophy that makes us not have the principles to answer that question, which is actually very easy to answer, but without those principles, it's very confusing. Well, isn't this just a group for priests who are punished because they deserve to be punished? Well, no, but they're disobedient. They didn't follow the rules the bishop said. And that's what I want to try to give you some tools to be able to answer that question. So to do that, we have to start with what is law, because the claim is these priests broke the law. Well, and I have up on the screen two examples of modern definitions of law. I'm just going to read one, the bottom one, for you if you can't see it. Any written or positive rule or collection of rules prescribed under the authority of the state or nation as by the people in its constitution. So notice, all it is any rule. That's it, any rule. Whoever made it up, if they make up a rule, it's a rule, you have to obey. There's nothing, no qualifications, nothing. This is unique in human history, to have such a bare definition of law. Contrast that with St. Thomas Aquinas' definition. Law is the ordinance of reason for the common good made by him who has care of the community and promulgated. Now, we don't have a lot of time to talk about all those elements, but two of them I want to highlight for you. Notice one, there's a purpose. Law is for the common good. That modern definition is just a rule. Any rule. Have to follow it no matter what. It has no purpose. Number two, it's an ordinance of reason. To be law, it must be reasonable. It can't just be arbitrary or the will of the president or the bishop of Rome. It must be an ordinance of reason. Now, we have to understand that a little bit more. And here's, again, a little bit more of our modern idea. These are people that gave us our modern idea of law. Notice, I'm just going to look at the Thomas Hobbes one for now. We ourselves make the principles, that is, the causes of justice, namely law and covenants, whereby it is known what is justice and equity. So you notice, we decide what law is. We decide what's justice. That's the error of modern man. For Aquinas, law made by human beings, be they a pope, a governor, a mayor, are only the last step in making law. We do not determine what's just. God does, because God is the original legislator. So law is a combination in the classical tradition of three things. Reason, must be reasonable. Custom, because it's for the common good of the community. So what we have always done is limiting on law. And then finally, the will of the lawgiver. I'm going to decide this aspect of it. But it is bounded by those two other elements. Now, I said God is the original lawgiver. God promulgates the law at creation. It's called the eternal law, going all the way back to St. Augustine. And what he does is he promulgates principles of reason, the natural law, through the eternal law. Secondly, he promulgates the divine law, rules that are reinforcing the moral law and giving specific religious prescripts. But then he does something amazing. He lets us participate in his lawmaking authority. He's the only lawgiver. We have no right to make laws for ourselves. He does. But he says, I want you, just like he says to parents, I want you to participate in my creation. But you can't, you're not God. You can't just control it. I'm not going to do it now, right? That's the flaw of contraception. We think we're God. We're not God, we're just participants. He gives us a share of procreation. Same thing with law. We are not the makers of law deciding what's just and unjust. But he says, I'm going to give you a part to play. I will create the general principles, and then you can define them further. And this is actually the oldest canon law textbook written by the father of canon law, Gratian, the opening passage. Notice he says the human race is ruled by two things, namely, jus naturale, natural law, and long-standing custom. Doesn't say, notice, not by the rules made by your king, natural law and custom. We start with natural law, with the principles, and then we add to that the customs of the people as protected and guided by their rulers. So, from this very high-level summary, what are the points we can take from it? Law is more than random rules. Law must be rational and for the common good. Law also includes the long-standing customs of the community, be that the church or the nation. Any purported rule that is not reasonable, oriented to the common good, in accordance with long-held custom, is no law at all. So what is the process of lawmaking? God, as I said, has established the principles, the starting point of all law. They cover all cases because they are general. But then he wants us to move from the general to the particular, to give more particular advice and rules on how to live out that general principle of natural law. Now, again, sometimes this is hard in the abstract, so let me give an example. The fifth commandment, thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not unnecessarily endanger the lives of other people. Okay, that's the principle of natural law. So we get these big mechanical devices that can kill people, driving around in cars. We don't want to endanger people's lives. How do we drive in an orderly way to comply with the fifth commandment? Well, we need to make a decision. Should we all drive on the right or the left? God leaves that determination to the legitimate authorities. You decide, I'm going to give you some of my power, but that power is limited. You can't just say, okay, God, we'll decide that every 3 minutes, everybody randomly changes sides of the road. That's our rule. No, because that is not reasonably a determination of the general principle. Now, we can be like the English and pick the left, or Americans switch to the right. God says that's fine. But you can't, there's no third option. You're limited by the general principles. Now, what are some other aspects of this that, again, we don't have a lot of time to go into, but two other virtues that come out of this. Because there's a greater level of law, our rules are not all there is. And our rules are incomplete. Because whenever you get specific, you may leave cases out. And we're not God, so we're not omniscient. So we can't make laws that cover everything. So there are two concepts that go back to the ancient world, gnome and epikeia. Two Greek words simply for, the first one is, we might say gap fillers, not the quite best translation, but when the law is incomplete, it doesn't explain what to do in a case, the natural and divine law provide principles. Equity, when the rule made by the rule maker is not achieving the goal of law, you don't follow it. Equity steps in, and you go back to the general principles of natural or divine law. So these concepts are completely gone from the modern legal system, right? Because unless they wrote a statute, you got to follow it. That's all you can do. Right? So again, I'll give another example of these to help you. An ambulance doesn't need to stop at a red light, and it doesn't need a law telling it doesn't. Right? The goal is safety, to protect people. He's got someone dying, got to get to the hospital, you go through the red light. Right? A pope has no authority to attack the Mass, to deny the faithful the sacraments that Christ established. Christ established the form of the sacraments. He gave to the church the authority to determine the details. Here's the outline. You can determine details that correspond rationally to this form. That's fine. The church is free to do that. Not free to make details that are Protestant, that deny the faith, that undermine the faith, that cause ambiguity. That's not within the scope that he established. Just like the Pope can't create an eighth sacrament, no bishop can vary the details, like saying ambulances have to drive under the speed limit. What? That is completely contrary to the point. So whether it, again, I give an example from the church and from the state, laws are limited by the principles established by God. And when they contradict that ending, we don't follow them. So what do we do, though, when the law doesn't cover certain cases or doesn't fulfill its purpose? So give an example. Again, another example. Out-of-state doctor, not licensed to practice medicine. See somebody dying on the side of the road. Oh, sorry, law says can't operate, can't help you here, just die. That's what this mentality would lead to. But no, necessity knows no law. I'm a doctor, I can treat you. Even if the law doesn't allow it, in the written law by the state, the higher principle permits it. So let's switch over to the church. Give an example there. Written faculties. You can't go to that priest. He doesn't have, the bishop revoked his faculties. Well, why? Because he defended Catholic doctrine. Oh, okay, no, that's not right. Well, he doesn't have written faculties, can't go to his mass. Why were written faculties instituted? In the Protestant Reformation, when it was very confusing, right? It's easy now. Lutherans, we know who all these people are. But in the 16th century, like, a lot of these people were Catholic priests who apostatized. How do I know this person's legitimate? How do I know they're still Catholic? So the church created written faculties. Papers. Let me see, Father, are you really still a priest? Or did you go with those crazy heretics? That was the point of faculties, to protect the faithful so they knew they could trust the priest. To use that law to deny the fact that the faithful, the Mass, the sacraments, the true doctrine, is a perversion of the whole point of the law. And so, yes, a priest needs to obtain them, but not when they're being used not for the common good, but to punish a priest for doing nothing wrong. So, again, that's a very, I think, relevant example to this question. Okay, what about authority and obedience? Because what about the problem of, oh, well, he's just being disobedient? And this is really, we're going to get to the crux of the matter. And I'm going to deal with the example that gets thrown up a lot. What about Padre Pio? He was persecuted and he just suffered and didn't do anything about it and just stayed in his monastery. So, first of all, we have to talk about what is authority. Authority comes only from God. And like law, we have a very distorted notion of authority. Right? We think authority comes from us. We give it to the president. We give it to who's ever in charge. The church, no, authority cannot come from us. We are creatures. The only type of authority is God. Why? Because God created everything. He owns everything. And his authority is the only, as I said, lawgiver. However, he gives this authority to legitimately selected or appointed officials to fill out those details. But it is not his authority absolutely. Right? God has absolute authority. Any human being has limited authority. And therefore, can only be exercised within its scope. So, for example, if you're a parent and you leave your oldest son, they turn 16, 17, you're going to babysit. This is what you're allowed to do. You're allowed to give them dinner, no dessert, because they're being punished right now. You can play a game, they have to be in bed by 9 o'clock. Or actually you say, you have to be in bed at a reasonable time. Okay, that's your instructions. The son can't then say, okay, I'm in charge now. We're all going to go out, driving around, we're going to go to a movie, we're going to stay up till midnight. That's outside the scope of the delegated authority. And those rules, and the kids can't say, oh, well, he said I could do it. No, you heard the scope of the authority. Now, the need is, as I said, for these determinations. God gives us this power to determine what is the specific thing to be done. And he leaves that to sort of three orders of prudence. Individual, so some things we are to determine for ourselves. Who should we marry? What job should we pursue? They're things for us to determine ourselves. Some things are for our personal superiors, our parents, for religious order, those superiors. And then some things are left to the higher authorities, the state, the nation, and the church in their proper sphere. So first of all, the determinations have to be left in their proper sphere. A bishop can't order you to marry someone. That's not within the scope of his authority. But he's a higher authority. The bishop has more. Yes, but that's outside the scope of his authority to make that determination. That's for the individual, right? Decisions about raising children are for the familial authority, for the parents, right? So authority can only be exercised within these spheres or circles where it's granted. It then has to be an actual determination of natural and divine law, not a perversion or not something oriented to a different goal, to a different end. It's within scope. Now, again, the one area we're willing to see limitation, well, you're not the actual person. You stole the office, you had a coup, you're not the real president, so you don't have authority. We get that one, we accept that one. And that's the danger, because when we see in the church authorities like bishops or popes issuing these wrong rules, punishing priests, the only thing we can fall back on is, well, you must not be a bishop. You must not really be the pope. But that's not really the answer. But that's the only answer we have, because we think if you are legitimately in the office, you can do anything you want. Wrong. You may be legitimately in the office, but you cannot do anything you want. You're bound by the natural and divine law and by the ends for which you are to direct that. So what do we do when we're faced with one of these unjust exercises of law? Well, St. Thomas gives us the answer. Right? He says any rule that is made by an authority, right, that is contrary to the natural or divine law, that exceeds their authority because it's not a proper determination, it's not an ordinance of reason, it's not for the common good, is no law at all. He says these are like acts of violence rather than laws. Because as Augustine said, an unjust law is no law at all. So, what about obedience, which is the flip side of authority? But don't we just have to obey them because it was their job to make it? Well, again, obedience is bounded by authority. We have to obey all authority because that's good. That's why it's good to even stop at a traffic light, even if you say, I think it's okay, I think I could go now. Why? Because it's good to follow the rules when they are a legitimate, just rule. But what about when they contradict the divine or natural law? Well, first of all, we have to remember, and again, this is another distortion of modern times, obedience is a moral virtue. Moral virtues are in a hierarchy. Virtues are in a hierarchy. The highest virtues, St. Paul tells us, are faith, hope, and charity, and the greatest of these are charity. We can never have too much of those virtues. We can't love God too much. We can have a deficiency, but never too much. The moral virtues, we can get wrong on both ends by doing too much or too little. So, obedience is a moral virtue. We can have a lack of obedience, that's a vice, but we can also have an excess of obedience to where we obey and violate the higher virtues of faith, hope, and charity. So we can never obey if it's against the faith or against the love of God. Now, you think, well, that seems to make sense. I have seen a letter written by a bishop of the Catholic Church to someone saying, you should just obey this closure and shutdown of the Mass because obedience is greater than the faith. That's the problem. Obedience has been made a theological virtue that you can never have too much of. But you can. St. Thomas called it servility. So we have to realize that our obedience is limited by the authority of the lawgiver. If they exceed their authority, we don't have to obey. But it's a little more complicated. St. Thomas tells us, and again, I'll quote from St. Thomas again. Okay, so what if we have one of these unjust laws that are not meeting this criteria? What do we do? Well, he says, first of all, does it directly contravene the divine and natural law? Does it order you to do something directly against the divine and natural law? If so, you can't do it. The example he gives is the emperor orders you to offer incense to a pagan god, can't do it. Translate to our time. You will bless imitations of the sacrament of marriage by two people of the same sex, bishop to a priest. That is directly contravening the divine and natural law. You cannot bless something that is intrinsically evil. Can't do it. Doesn't matter the cost, as Abby Johnson said. Can't do it. Okay, but what about laws that don't directly force you to do something against the divine and natural law? They prevent you from doing something you should do. They're unjust. There, St. Thomas says, okay, you have to use prudence. You cannot offer the Mass because you're speaking out against the LGBTQ lobby. Priest in Texas has happened to. You're testifying in city council, can't do that. You're saying you're defending the faith, can't do it. You're not allowed to say Mass. Okay, not saying Mass necessarily is not against the divine law, but it is an unjust order because the priest was doing nothing wrong. What does he do? Well, there St. Thomas says it depends. It depends on, is this just going to affect you? Is it going to affect the common good? First of all, he says you don't have to obey it. So you're not obligated to obey it. But sometimes you just go along with the unjust punishment for the sake of not creating scandal, for respect for the law. Sometimes there are readings of prudence where you don't obey the law directly, but you just accept it. But there are other times where you don't. And again, that is where it affects the faith, the common good, the salvation of souls. Why is a priest ordained? To offer sacrifice and the salvation of souls. You don't have to obey, but if those ends are implicated, then you are free to just completely ignore it. Now, here is where we get to the Padre Pio example. We have to draw a distinction between secular and religious priests. So Padre Pio, yes, was unjustly persecuted with an unjust law that was no law at all. But he just observed it for a period of time, even though he didn't have to. He was a contemplative. He was a Franciscan, lived in a monastery. What was his end? Pray, offer the Mass privately. That's really all he had to do. I know he had lots of children. He heard lots of confessions. That wasn't his primary focus. Secular priests' primary focus is to bring the sacraments to the faithful. So Padre Pio's reaction to his persecution is going to be different than a secular priest. Right? Why? He can just do that and it only affects him. Right? A secular priest whose mission at his ordination is to go out, not to have that higher calling of the contemplative, but to go out to bring the sacraments and the faith to people, his reaction, he does not have to follow the example of Padre Pio. That's the distinction a lot of people don't want to draw. And there are other examples throughout history where unjust orders were given to certain saints. The principle that was very clear until our century was, if it affects the common good of the church, salvation of souls, don't follow the unjust punishment. If it's just you, so you're told you have to do something unjustly, you can't go here anymore to this parish, we're going to unjustly assign you to another. Okay, maybe it's a bad rule, maybe it wasn't fair, but you're still able to live out your mission. Maybe you should just go along with it. But not if you're told, sorry, just you can't offer Mass, you can't hear confessions, you can't do anything, when that was what you were charged with on your ordination. So, what are the principles? Secular priests' primary task are the Mass, salvation of souls. Religious priests primarily to pray for the church, offer sacrifice and prayer. The unjust persecution of secular and religious priests will be different. So I want to close, because I know my time is up now, with the first canceled priest, Archbishop Lefebvre. he was schooled in the seminary, the French seminary, by Father Lefebvre in these principles. And so he knew how to act without hesitation. His first reaction when he was being persecuted by the Vatican in 1969 was, I'm done. I've been a bishop. I've been a missionary. I'm retiring. I'm just going to go say my private mass by myself. It was only when seminarians came to him and said, we can't get a seminary formation with the faith. There's no seminary in the world. And first he said, well, go here, try here. Back, it's heresy. We can't. And finally he said, okay, this is now affecting the common good of the church. I will found a seminary. He saw the distinction. If he was just a retired elderly bishop, he was happy to go off and leave things alone and suffer the persecution in silence. When it affected the good of the church, he knew he did not have to obey. And that's why the Vatican threw everything they had at him. He said, we account these as nothing, these suspensions ad divinis, the purported declaration of excommunication. Why? Because he said, I know the principles. I am only doing what every bishop of the Catholic Church has done for 2,000 years. We know that can't be wrong. These are pieces of paper. I know Bishop Fillet tells a story about a priest who was, quote, excommunicated and laicized for preaching the faith. He brought that document to Cardinal Levada, the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith. He says, and it wasn't one of their priests. It was a diocesan priest who came to them for help. He said, what do I do with this? He said, I'll throw it in the garbage. He said, well, this is a document of the Vatican. Oh, it's worthless. That's the Congregation for Religious. That is what we have to recognize we're living through. We have to make these distinctions. You can't be punished for something that is right. And even if it, quote, breaks the law, it doesn't break the law of God. We ought to obey God rather than men. Really, if not for I've handed on what I received, probably the best and the second best epitaph for the tomb of Archbishop Lefebvre. But I think you'll hear more about that angle from Kennedy Hall tomorrow. So thank you for your time, and thank you to the Coalition for all you do.